Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I am your host, George Blitch, and today I got to sit down and chat with Andrew Scott Wills. For those who are not familiar, he produces music under the name Hawken Horse. Hawken, obviously, the rifle, horse. What are the two things that are most important on the frontier? Hey, your Hawken and your horse, right? So he put those together, started writing music, and he is deep within his discography. He has a new album, actually a double album called Hammer and Hewn, Volume 1 and 2. Volume 1 opens today. That's right, Friday, July 12th. Volume 1 drops, and Volume 2 will be dropping in October. Now, a little hint to the listeners, if you guys want to go ahead and get the jump and listen to Volume 2 right now, you can. You can order a CD or a vinyl through his website, hawkenhorse.com, and he's shipping them both together. It's a really cool double album, really neat artwork too. It's a great piece, I think, for you to hold in your hands and check out while you're listening to this awesome album. So that's one way you can kind of jump in and get, volume two. Otherwise, that volume two will come out in October. So it's streaming everywhere as of today. Apple Music, Amazon, whatever you're listening to, iTunes, Spotify, it's all there. There's some links below, and you can go to his website and kind of jump off on whichever avenue you want to be listening. This is really an amazing album. It spans kind of a time period from 1765 and to the end of Volume Two, which was 1887. So you kind of have that first 70 years or so in that first album, and 50 years or so in that Volume Two. A lot of wonderful content. He's talking about some of the heroes and really well-known stories and people during that American frontier times, right? So we got to talk today about, this album, and kind of how he got to doing this solo project. Obviously he's worked with a lot of other people in the country singer-songwriter music business, kind of his time there in Nashville, working with some of the greats and writing music for them. But this is his thing. This is his passion, the time period of, our American frontier that he really gravitates towards. As far as the musicality, some of the instruments he's working on kind of set that time period. Some of the hunting he talks about, black powder, muzzleloader, flintlock, and things. So we kind of dive into that and just the myriad stories around that. I think you guys are really going to enjoy. Andrew's a wonderful guy, very, very talented. And this, Volume 1 that's available today, I can't wait for you guys to go stream it. I really love this one. And I can't wait for you guys to hear Volume 2. Like I said before, go over to hawkenhorse.com, learn more about that. And if you want to support him directly, you can purchase one of those CDs or vinyls from that website there, and you can kind of get that little jump. Listen to Volume 2, because once you hear Volume 1, you're going to want to hear Volume 2. Go over to his site, order those, and make sure you're streaming this and share it with a friend. And once again, thank you, Andrew, for joining me. Thank you, everyone who's listening to the Son of a Blitch podcast. If you think this is something one of your friends may enjoy, please share this episode with them as well. And thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have a blessed day. Take care. Hey, Andrew, how you doing today, man?
I'm great. How are you doing, George?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm kind of juggling all the hurricane stuff that's happened here in the Houston area. So it's been a little bit crazy this week, but I appreciate
Yeah.
that you are allowed me to kind of reschedule so that we can get this done, because this is going to be dropping on Friday, the day that Volume 1 of your new album comes out. And I'm definitely wanting to dive in and chat more about this with, Hawken Horse, the music that you're producing. But I think we need to go back to the beginning, man. Let's let listeners kind of get an idea of where you grew up, how you got into music, your love of the outdoors, and then we'll kind of thread that needle as we go.
Well, I grew up somewhere there were no hurricanes.
I want to
I
move
grew
there
up,
now.
yeah, yeah. I grew up in Southwest Ohio, which we did have tornadoes, but it was a great place to grow up. Small town, just outside of Xenia, Ohio, and Xenia is a historical hotbed that nobody knows about because it's just kind of a drive-through town. But um, it has a lot of history there, frontier history, Native American history, and I just grew up there in the middle of it with history signs everywhere, and it really, you know, it grabbed my attention early on, and I was really like reading every sign front and back, and getting into the interesting details about where I actually lived. And I grew up, music was big in my house, and lots of, you know, from oldies to gospel records to, Elvis, like all that stuff was big. And I loved music, and I was a creator. Just I wanted to, build things, make things. And so that kind of led into this whole, music journey that I've been on, and wanting to create my own music, not learn how to play that song I just heard on the radio, but to write my own song was my desire and my instant thing that I was drawn to. But growing up in Ohio was a good thing. It's funny because I had, the outdoors all around me, but I was always longing for higher mountains or bigger lakes or deeper woods, because it was Ohio was, especially in Western Ohio, it's pretty flat. It's pretty, it's lots of farms and lots of crops, and it was a great place to live. But I was always like looking at that horizon, like looking for somewhere with more adventure, more mystery, I guess. But I think that's true wherever you live. Wherever you live is kind of like, wow, what else is out there, And
Sure.
but now that I'm older, I have a way bigger appreciation for Ohio. It's just got a lot of, great hunting. I mean, whitetail hunting, it's like one of the top 5 states
Sure. Yeah.
easily.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Southwest Ohio is where I grew up, and outdoors and history junkie.
So when did you first get an instrument in your hand? Did you start with, a guitar? Did you start with piano like many do growing up and stuff? Like what
Mm-hmm.
was your transition from I like this, I want to start playing music, and then kind of maybe, how that evolved in your, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously I'm hearing all sorts of sounds on your album, and I know we'll get to that too, but I was kind of curious, what was your start in that
Yeah.
musicality, and was somebody influencing you? Is this something that you sought out on your own? Did you have a mentor and you take lessons? Like, how did that journey begin? Because
Yeah.
obviously, professional songwriter, you've done it with, for your project here, Hawken Horse, you've written for other people. So that's something that, obviously the caliber of which you've climbed to. But I kind of want to know about that genesis of that story. How did you first kind of create music and go from there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was 15, it was rock music. I mean, we had a piano forever, and I just didn't care.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to, wasn't interested. I'm like, oh, that's a wussy instrument. But now, later in my years, I'm like, man, I sure wish I would have picked that up back then. I mean, I could play some basic stuff now, but back then it was the guitar. It was, rock music, and I was like, wow, I want a guitar. And so at 15, I bought an old beater guitar from a buddy who was upgrading to a nicer guitar, and it was literally like $20. He just wanted to get rid of it, and I was like, done. And brought it home and started learning basic chords. I sang in the choir at our church growing up, so I had some singing. I'm still not like some great. I'm no Chris Stapleton or anything, but they, the term singer songwriter. I like to say I'm a songwriter singer. I,
I haven't heard that before. I like that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. I'm a songwriter first, and then I'm a singer. Is how I like to look at myself. But yeah, so that I got that guitar at 15, and then I started, writing immediately. Like I think I learned one song, and then just for the process of figuring out how the chord structure was going, and then I was like, oh, now I'll write my own. And so, being in rock, really loving the rock music, I started going to those minor chords and power chords and easy chords, if we're being
Sure.
honest.
Sure.
And uh anyway, it was love at first strum, like I was into it, and I started writing songs, and it was always a hobby of mine. Even I went to college for business, and and I was studying and doing everything, but I'd come home and that would be my hobby is I would write a song or I would record. I started getting early recording software in, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. I had like this terrible recording software, and it's funny when I compare to what I work with now, just what I was using back then, and
Oh yeah. Look,
it's it's
night and
funny.
day difference, man. I remember buying like I think it was like a 2 gigabyte hard drive for like $800 for my musical
Yeah,
recording. And now it's like, you can, they're giving away things. No one uses anything
oh
that small, but and the
yeah,
software was a lot different in the late 90s, 100%.
oh the sound blaster like board you would have to buy, this audio interface you'd buy to put into your computer, and now it's like all just you just plug it in with a USB or whatever, and it just everything just works now. It's crazy. Even for your podcast, I'm sure it's just pretty simple,
Oh yeah,
you
it's
know.
plug and play. Before you had to kind of like know all sorts of technological arrangements and these things, and it's like
Yeah,
there was a latency that happened. Yeah, it was
yeah,
different world for sure.
yeah. But that was my hobby. Is I'd stay up until 1, 2 in the morning recording stuff, and then struggle to get out of bed to go to class, and um, but it was always a passion of mine. I wasn't serious about it, and then I went into the outdoor industry. Um, I started working in the backpacking industry and for a manufacturer in Pennsylvania, and in the outdoors. I mean, that's always been a very big passion of mine. So I was excited to be working in the outdoor industry, and you know, I still came home at night and was writing songs, and it was just this driving force for me. And by that time I was listening to more country and bluegrass, and I was listening to all kinds of stuff, and I was getting into old stuff like Bob Dylan, and really deep diving into some classics. And I have a ridiculous collection of music back before streaming happened. And even behind me, I've got tons of vinyl records and all this. But yeah, music was just, it was, I'm a writer, I guess. At the core, I'm a writer. And music was one of the avenues that I just naturally loved and was talented at naturally, but I also worked my butt off to get better. And finally, when my wife and I were living in Southeast Ohio, right off the Ohio River down there, and I was doing some songwriting still, and I entered a songwriting competition and won it. And and it was like this huge thing for me because I got a co-write with country singer Andy Griggs back in, he was a country star in the 90s and early 2000s, and I got a co-write with him, and he recorded it and put it on the radio, and it was like, oh my gosh. And doors started opening for me, and so my wife and I made the decision, all right, let's move to Nashville. So I moved down here in 2012, and it was then that I really started, getting to learn songwriting, because I got down here and learned real quick. I didn't know anything. And um, so I got to write with some heavy hitters, like some legendary songwriters who I grew up loving their songs. And it's funny when you're sitting down to write with somebody like that, of that caliber, and you're thinking of a line, and you're trying to write together, and you think of a line. Well, they've already thought of that line and figured out why it's not going to work and moved on before you even utter the idea. So there's nothing like learning on the job. Like, you learn quick and you learn, hard knocks.
Yeah.
So having a mentor like that is like crucial. I mean, I, I can't value it enough.
So when you were doing that, like eventually you started to write your music with Hawken Horse. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about that.
Yeah.
Obviously, as I mentioned before, you got volume one of Hammer and Hewn that's coming out on this Friday, the day that this is released. It'll be live then.
Yeah.
And people will be able to stream it. And we'll talk about where everyone can get that later. But I was curious, when did you start writing music in this caliber? Because it's a time period, right? I mean, you kind of like, it's like 1765, 1887. There's this period of time. There's this history that is rich about the American frontier that you talk about. Your subject matter
Yeah.
is very much, while I say singular focused, it's not just the singular focus because there's a lot of different things that you're talking about. But that time period, that way of life, is something that
Mhm.
you focus in on. And I was curious about what it was that that allure for you and why you wanted to focus on this time period. I mean, it's rich, it's beautiful, I love it. I'm glad you're doing it. And it's great content. There's so much to talk about. But what was it about that spoke to you that made you kind of drawn in there originally? And then obviously you have many recordings you've done under that name and under that umbrella for that music. So I was just kind of curious about like how that kind of got started, and maybe you can walk us through to
Yeah.
the new release and what this one's focusing on as far as subject matter and timeline and things.
Yeah. So I'd say it was like in 2020 when a lot of people started pivoting. 2020, 2021, I started really getting kind of over the Nashville machine and trying to write, in this giant sausage factory and trying to create a song. And I was literally writing 5 songs a week, you know, every week. And I have thousands of songs I've written in my career, and the vast majority of them nobody has ever or will ever hear. They're just going to sit there and pile up dust. And that was kind of soul sucking in a way. And the other thing is, I wasn't writing songs for me. I was sitting
Right.
down with an artist, and we were trying to write a song for them. And so it was never about me. For 12 years, I was writing and I was having success and had songs on the radio and getting to meet heroes, and it was cool.
Yeah.
And I was very proud. I'm very proud of all that. However, artistically, it wasn't fulfilling,
In the same matter. Yeah.
that,
100%.
yeah, exactly. And so I tell this story a lot, but I was uh, whitetail hunting in Wisconsin, like northern Wisconsin, and almost probably an hour south of Duluth. I was that far up there, and so it was a long drive, solo drive, and I was just like, "What can I do?" And I'm a thinker. I'm a business guy. I love that show Shark Tank. I'm always thinking of ideas, and I'm like, what kind of record could I make that's just for me? And I don't care if anybody else likes it, but if Andrew Scott Wills was going to listen to a record, what would I want to listen to? And I thought of the first thing I thought was the soundtrack to Jeremiah Johnson, the movie. I was like, that's what I would listen to. Jeremiah Johnson. And I was like, I should do my own record about the mountain man, about American history. And so that's where the idea for Hawken Horse came about, was in the cab of my Silverado on my way to Wisconsin. And then the whole time I was up there in the tree stand, I was thinking, I was writing down ideas, and I was putting this plan together. And then the first song I ever wrote was Free, which is kind of my breakout song. And it just went viral. Like in the last 2 months, it was in the top 5 of Instagram audio, like above Cardi B and you know, and what's the Pharrell and all those people, and then there was a song about a mountain man.
Love it.
But but it was back to that growing up with the frontier history all around me, and people's names like Daniel Boone and Simon Kenton on the signs next to where I put in my canoe in the Little Miami River, and Tecumseh, and all these legends of the 1700s and the then Northwest frontier. And I was like, I would love to do just like a project that is just about this. And so that's where the idea came from. And I made my self-titled debut, Hawken Horse, which had Free on it, Man of the Mountain Land, Lay Me Down in Montana, some of those songs. And then that led to like Old Ephraim, which is a super popular song that I wrote about, grizzly bear attacks. And then came my pet project, which is really about where I grew up and the Kentucky frontier, the Ohio frontier. And it was really about Daniel Boone and Simon Kenton. And that was my Long Hunter record. And then the Westward Water was more pushing west from St. Louis into the Rockies and more about, the fur trade and Lewis and Clark. So then when I got to like, okay, I put out 3 records and an EP, and where do I go from here? And I was just writing, and I was like, I just don't want to write more of the same. I want to get creative. And I had recently watched that old TV miniseries called Centennial, and then it made me think of like that classic movie How the West Was Won, with all those stars in it, John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and all those guys. And I was like, that's what I need to do, is like a quote unquote sweeping saga, but it's audio. And I want to just tell a huge story. And then the song started writing, and then I started figuring out that, oh, this is not just going to be about, Daniel Boone, or this is going to stretch into, the late 19th century even. And I wanted to capture the heart of the end of the fur trade. And there's this kind of analogy that I was feeling to what we're kind of where we're at right now in the world and in the United States. I felt this analogy of, we're like this last of a dying breed. Like there's these people who love the outdoors, who love conservation and taking care of, our resources and going on adventures and, pushing off in a canoe for 2 weeks, or going on a Dall sheep hunt up in the mountains. And those people that are like us I feel like they're dwindling. And I feel like my listeners are those same people. We're the adventurers, the people that you're going to find my bones in parts unknown. And so this record was kind of like a big statement about how American history unfolded and how we got to where we're at, and also kind of like a nod to a lot of the famous, heroes that were a part of that unfolding. And I don't know if you want to talk about specific tracks or not, but I do talk about some mountain men like John Colter and Jedediah Smith.
Yeah. Well, some very rich, fascinating, historical folks there. I mean, John Colter obviously went through quite an ordeal. You write about it in your song, which kind of talks about, what happened to him. And if you want to go ahead and lay that out, we'll maybe talk about a couple other tracks. Powder in the Pan's one that is one of my personal favorites there. And I had some questions around that too. But talk about that John Colter track, because it's boy, he lived some adventures.
He really did, and that was only one of them.
Right.
The guy was unparalleled, but that one song I do take on is John Colter's famous run when the Blackfeet sent him on a run for his life, naked through the open tundra, really, and they were chasing him with lances. And so the song is that story in song format. And I recorded it at a jogging beat to capture the vibe of what's happening. And I have some listeners who are runners, and I kind of had them in mind when I was doing that. Is you know, is this guy's literally running for his life, and so I was like, this could be a pretty epic workout song. So talk about motivation.
Dude, you're gonna get like Nike or Adidas, be like, we want to license that for our new running track, and
Yeah, totally.
execs, if you're
But
listening.
yeah, please hit me up. But that was a story that I've loved, but I was also a little nervous to take on because it's iconic.
Sure.
And there just hadn't been a song that was like a compelling about it. I mean, there's been songs that are just they tell the story or loosely mention it or something, but I wanted to like tell a story in a dramatic fashion, and so that was my goal with that track. And Jedediah Smith on that song, that is one I've wanted to take on for a while too, and because he was a very very cool guy, he was a part of so much rich history. And when I have another song called Enterprising Young Men that was on Westward Water. And it talks about how William Henry Ashley puts the ad in the paper in St. Louis seeking enterprising young men to head up the Missouri into the wilderness to trap. Well, Jedediah is one of the guys who applied for that and was hired to go on that. And anyway, later on, that song is called Jedediah Strong, and it talks about the time he was attacked by a grizzly. And it's it's a heavy song. I mean, it's it doesn't hold back, I don't think, on what happens. But and that's kind of important to me. I'm not trying to dance around the details, and I'm not avoiding subjects that maybe not be you know politically correct, or they're just true. So I history is important to me, and I want to make sure it's remembered, and that's part of it's one of the objectives of my music is to document this stuff and to introduce it to new ears. I've got a whole lot of people in their 20s and 30s who've never even heard of some of this stuff, and they're like, who? Like maybe they passed a sign that said Jedediah something, like for a state park or something, but they didn't really know who it was. And this music is a way to tell the story and bring life into these legends who aren't with us anymore. But it helps you better understand where you're at. Like when you're hunting this mountain range in northern Montana and you see, a name on something, it helps you better appreciate, oh, like these are the people that were here and did this and years before I got here.
When you were talking about, your previous album there, and you're talking about some of those long hunters, you ended up, I was right around the time too that Clay Newcomb and Stephen Ranella were working on their Long Hunter book. And I know that you got onto the Bear Grease podcast, you spoke with Clay, and then you guys actually wrote a song together on this volume one of the album. So I wanted to, before we kind of introduce that track and chat about that, I was kind of curious if you could kind of talk about how you ended up working, meeting Clay and working on that. And then obviously you did the Ballad of Warner Glenn when they did a feature doc that, was hosted by Clay Newcomb, and, you got your song in there. So just kind of curious how that kind of relationship formed between you guys.
Yeah, so it basically started with that first record, the debut Hawken Horse, and I was looking for ways to promote it. I had a very small following on Instagram, which is crazy to think about now, but I had a mighty, 500 followers at the time, but they were passionate. And anyway, I was looking for ways to promote it, and my brother, who's also an avid Bear Grease listener, he was like, you have you listened to that Daniel Boone series he did? And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, it was great. And he's like, maybe send it to them. I don't know. And so I was like, oh, it's not a bad idea. So I sent Clay a copy of the album, you know, like that he could listen to. And I was just like, hey, I'm just looking for any publicity, like, no pressure, love it, hate it, love the podcast. And he got back to me probably a couple weeks later and was like, man, I'm he's so humble, but he just was like, I'm just, he has 20 songs, he listens to in his whole playlist, but he's like, I like this stuff. And at the time I didn't realize, but he was in the beginning of working on the Crockett series. And he still hadn't told me that at the time, but he was like, I'd like to have you on the podcast at some point. And I was like, I would love to be on the podcast. So and ironically, I was in Florida visiting that same brother, and Clay texted me and was like, hey, I'm getting ready to do a series on Crockett. Do you want to be on the show during the render to talk about Crockett? And I was like, yes, love me some Crockett. So
Yep.
anyway, I headed out there, and Clay's just a great guy. His whole family, they're just amazing people. But we actually ended up working on this song for before we had worked on the Warner Glenn song
Yep.
for the MeatEater documentary on Warner Glenn, and that was the first song we worked on. But then later I was starting to work on this record, Hammered and Hewn, and he casually mentioned, there's that song Tennessee Stud, and I know Johnny Cash and a lot of other people sing that, but he's like, Arkansas needs its own song called Arkansas Mule. And I was like, that's a great title and the most Clay title I've ever heard. But I said, let's do it. And so we kind of wrote that over text message, just shooting lines back and forth. And as we were living our life, just, he'd be out there, you know, riding banjo, and a line would hit him and he'd text it over to me, and I'd be driving and I'd voice memo an idea. We just wrote it like that back and forth. And then I recorded it, and I actually played it for the first time ever on his podcast at the Black Bear Bonanza this past
Yeah. Yeah.
event. And that was the first time I'd ever played it. And, but anyway, yeah, big fan of the Newcomb family. And anyway, that's probably one of my favorite songs on there, just because I had such a blast writing it with Clay, and I love a good story song. So
Indeed. Well, this album has so many great ones, and you've done, there are some other collaborations too with this. So who are some other folks that you've
mhm.
collaborated with on this? And then I want to kind of dive into your recording,
Yeah,
style and format and what you're doing and what kind of, instruments you're using. But before that, let's talk about some of the other collaborations, because there's a couple of really nice ones there.
yeah. So I've written. Well, one of them is Brooke Maloof, who Brooke is from Dallas, Texas, and she's my first Nashville co-writer. So the first trip I ever came to Nashville, I met her and we started writing virtually, actually, because I was in Ohio still and she was in Dallas, and we started writing on Skype. Remember Skype?
Yes. Back in the
We
day, we used to put a quarter in
in
the
the old
computer,
days.
and yeah.
But we started writing, and we kind of like we're on the same level and kind of going through learning pains and writing together. So I've been writing with Brooke for a very long time, going on, I mean, literally probably 17 years we've been writing together, and we just write so well together. And I started telling her about this Hawken Horse project, and specifically Hammered and Hewn. I was like, I need I want to write with somebody who has some of that cowboy in their blood, because She's born and raised in Texas. She's been involved in the Texas cattle, I
Yeah,
forget what the
organizations and
association.
uh-huh.
Yeah, and her mom is uh, a historian of sorts of the Western history. And anyway, she's a great writer, and she's she a screenplay writer is kind of where she started. But anyway, Brooke and I have written quite a few Hawken Horse songs over the years, and her first one I ever released that she wrote with me was "Lay Me Down in Montana" from the first record. Um, anyway, big fan of Brooke Maloof. And Danny Simpson, he's a frequent collaborator of mine as well. He is number one. He's hilarious. He has written in both the country and the comedy world. Um, he's he's written songs by like Brad Paisley, Kenny Chesney, um, Rodney Atkins. I can't even. I'm just trying to think of some Toby Keith, but he is just a great, great, great lyricist. And I knew immediately, I was like, Danny would be great, because if you walked into Danny's house, the first thing you would see is literally statues, like Indian paintings, and dream catchers and deer heads. I mean, this guy is a mountain man who lives in Tennessee. And he was like so in. He was like, and he also has an enormous beard that would put Santa Claus to shame. But I was like, Danny, I need to write some mountain man songs. And he was up for the assignment. So he's written things like Bitterroot Prayer with me. And on the new record, he wrote, I'm blanking right now, Coonskin Cap. I know
Uh-huh.
he was a writer on, and Shikanahay, which was the last single. Uh, he was on that one. He's a great writer and a good compliment for me and my skills. Um, and the other thing is, I'm a songwriter who I don't need a co-writer.
Right.
Like I can sit down and write a song melodically, lyrically, like I got it. But as a songwriter, it's healthy and it pushes you to bring in other ideas. And that's why I lean on some of these friends, because they come up with the ideas that even I never would have thought of. Brooke came up with one of my favorite songs on this whole record. It's actually on volume 2, called Requiem, that I think a lot of folks are gonna connect with. And I never would have come up with that idea, and she just brought it to me, and I was like, wow, yes. So that's why it's good to work with other people, and teamwork does make the dream work.
It does, man. Well, I mean, it's really
Yeah.
cool to see that, and it kind of stretches your music or ideas and brings in, just that new play. Being in bands before and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of being in a room when you have four people writing a song or whatever it may be. Sometimes one person's
Yeah.
idea takes the lead or whatever, but when you're doing your own thing, you have a focus on what it is you want to do. You had an idea if you wanted to do 2 volumes, or maybe it was just the I'm sure sheer amount of output of the songs. But
Yeah.
bringing in fresh blood, it's always cool, man. It sparks new things, and it's fun to work with other people, especially being a singer-songwriter or songwriter-singer.
Yeah.
It's spending a lot of time in your own head and your own space. It's neat to bring in those other ones. I was kind of curious too, like with the idea of having 2 volumes. For listeners who are
Mhm.
just about to come upon this, is volume 1 and volume 2 two separate things, or is it just like, hey, I wrote all these songs and I'm just equally dividing them this way, or is it a time period, or is it a certain thing that you're doing that you're focusing on each one? And then, I probably should have had this earlier too. If you could also tell people the idea of what Hawken Horse means. I know it, but maybe for those listeners who
Yeah.
are just coming into it, if you can kind of maybe lay those things out so we can just kind of jump into those a little more too.
Yeah. I'll start with the Hawken Horse. On that fateful trip to Wisconsin, when I came up with this idea, I was thinking of the Jeremiah Johnson soundtrack. And so when I was coming up with a name for this project, my thought was, what are the two most important things to a mountain man? And I was like, his Hawken rifle and his horse. And I was like, oh, that's
Done.
great. They both, yeah, I was like, perfect. They both start with H. They kind of got a ring to it. My Danny Simpson, he was like, it kind of rhymes with Rockin' Horse. And he's like, oh, which is kind of nice. It kind of has a ring to it. So that's how I came up with the name Hawken Horse. And I think it just is a great way of just describing what the music is
Sure.
without being too ridiculously upfront with it. Like it's people who don't know what a Hawken is, it's mysterious. They don't know. And I love that. Here's a fun fact. When I'm writing a song, I try to put one word in every song that is not used in the modern time. That's like an objective of mine. I don't want your average 16-year-old to know what the heck I'm talking about. I want them to have to look it up or ask somebody. They'll probably just Google it. And I'm not trying to educate them necessarily, but I'm just trying to, I think that's the connection to history is having some of that lingo in there. But yeah, Hammered and Hewn has 2 volumes because, well, number one, the sheer volume of songs. I mean, it's 28 tracks. But also I wanted to show different time periods, and it's chronological. Like the second volume is later, and it starts in 1837, like post fur trade boom. Like it's kind of like when the trade starts going downhill a little bit, and volume 1 starts in the late 1700s when Kentucky was still just the wild frontier. So this covers a lot of time, and it didn't start that way, but it grew into that, and the plan became clear as I kept writing and getting deeper into it. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm visualizing this now. This is like one of those old movies with an intermission. It's it just
I love it. That's
keeps
well
on
put.
going.
Yeah. That's great. Well, and it separates the time periods too. So like, I mean, in the subject matter, obviously too, you're going to have different people that you're going to be talking about. You got Colter on the first one, obviously, and you got the coonskin hat. And there's going to
Yeah.
be some other things in volume 2, which, we'll have you back on to talk about that a little bit more. But obviously the one that's
Yeah.
coming out today as we release this with volume 1, um, you know, I'm listening to it, and, I think about this time where a lot of, the musical instruments, a lot of wood and wire based things, right? And
Yeah.
I'm hearing the percussion, and, being a musician myself, I'm listening to these things. I'm like, okay, I can identify this instrument. I can identify that. I was curious about, what are your main things? Obviously guitar that you're
Mhm.
primarily writing these with. What are some of these other instruments you're bringing in for certain types of feels, emotions? Maybe is it a nod to that time period and some of those types of instruments that were done there? Were there any parameters at play when you were doing that? And then, within that too, I'm curious about a lot of the percussive elements. Like when you're sitting there in your studio,
Yeah.
what is around you that you're, collectively grabbing from to fit these pieces of these puzzles together that eventually become these songs?
Yeah. Oh, I love nerding out on this stuff.
Yes, me too.
I I'm also a producer, and I've produced other acts. I've downtown Nashville and some of the biggest studios, and I've had full bands, with some of the best players that you can find in the world at my
Sure.
disposal. Hawken Horse is like, it's different. This is like how loose and gritty and earthy can I get so that it fits what I'm talking about. And so I don't seek out, who played on Carrie Underwood's last record. I'm playing 95% of everything on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that adds to the organicness of it. It's not always, pretty, or it's not always the prettiest lick you could come up with, um but yes, I wanted to historically kind of honor what instruments would be used, or even available on those fringe areas of the frontier. I actually wrote an article that was in Guns of the Old West last year about music on the frontier, and so I lean heavily on guitar, fiddle, dulcimer. I'll use a dulcimer. Um, I have guitars in different tunings. I have one of my favorite things I do is this is an old Tom Petty trick, but I have a guitar in standard tuning, and then I have another guitar in a Nashville high strung, and it mimics a 12-string guitar. And on some of those huge Tom Petty records, that was the classic sound. Instead of using a 12-string, which makes it sound more like John Denver, you would use a regular tune and then a high strung on left and right sides in alternating patterns, and it creates this movement, this cool energy. It's an acoustic energy though, which that's the other thing about my music. You don't hear electric guitar, you don't
Right.
hear, any crazy heavy bass. There's some very simple bass lines in some of it. When it Because sometimes guitars and dulcimers get a little bright, so I definitely need to add some bass in there. I lean a lot on cello,
Mm-hmm.
because I think, especially on, you know the Daniel Boone side, I have like one track on there which I did not play on that, the Wilderness. I just scored it, and then I had a quartet perform it for me. But um, it's kind of a nod to the music that was happening on the East Coast and the big cities and over in England. And so, yeah, all my music is string based. Percussion, I have several native drums I've acquired on my trips. I have an elk skin rattle that I use on a lot of my tracks. I'm very, you know, I'm a stickler on that kind of stuff. I actually have a Native American flute that I had made, a Native American out in the Smokies built this, and it's in the key of F. A lot of my songs are a full step down, which
Mm-hmm.
makes it a little hard for people to figure out what I'm playing. I'm throwing a curveball at them, but um, anyway, I like to get that low guttural thing, and I think it adds to the earthy storytelling aspect. Is why I do that. There's there's definitely a process, there's a method to the madness, but so lots of instruments are surrounding me, as well as artwork and stuff that I use to inspire me, and you know guns hanging on the wall.
Sure. Well, and I was thinking about the gun part too. You have the song Powder in the Pan, which I really, I've listened multiple times through the first volume because we're going to be talking about that primarily, but I've listened to the second as well. But in the first one, Powder in the Pan, there's lines you said, autumn in the air, rifle in the hand, nothing on earth like the woodland, face to the wind with powder in the pan. And I was thinking about when I'm listening to this sounds bring me to this time because of the instrumentation and just being a musician. I just was picking up on this. I was like, oh man, this sounds like of this era. And then I thought of this era. Is Andrew sitting there hunting with black powder rifles or with, like, are you not only are you using this musicality of like the instruments that are around this time and stuff there too, it made me wonder, like, I know you're a hunter, I know you're an outdoorsman. Are you also mimicking in your own experience when you're out in the woods using some of these era rifles and things of that nature? And I was wondering, what that kind of lifestyle is, and is that something you're doing for
Yeah.
inspiration? And have you taken some of these trips in the woodlands where you're maybe not hunting a bear, maybe you are, and using this technology from this time period and just kind of encapsulating that?
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious if you could give me your thoughts and what you're experimenting with in that side of things.
Yeah. I love, I bought a flintlock, 2 years ago, my first flintlock. I've had a muzzleloader, percussion Hawken for years. And I would say up until fairly recently, I've taken almost all of my deer with a muzzleloader. Like that was growing up in Ohio, there was no rifles.
Right.
You couldn't hunt. It's shotgun slug or a muzzleloader. And I was like, well, a muzzleloader is way cooler and
Yeah.
way more accurate. I mean, you got them farther.
Yeah.
I'm just like, give me that Hawken all day. And so I've taken every deer I've ever taken pretty much, other than the ones I've taken with bow. But, and I've taken some with 30-06 and stuff. But what I'm saying is probably 75% of the animals I've taken have been with a muzzleloader. And now I've introduced flintlock into the mix. Picture Daniel Day-Lewis running through the woods and Last of the Mohicans. Like I'm in love with a flintlock. It is amazing. And I took my first buck with it this past year, and it was so fulfilling. And the cool part was where I hunt. There's a piece of private land that I get to hunt, and it is right there, probably 20 minutes from where Crockett lived in South Tennessee. And that kind of brought it full circle for me. I was like,
Sure.
Crockett literally haunted this ground at one
Walking in
point.
his footsteps.
Here I
Yeah.
am. Yes, walking in his footsteps. And that I kind of had a moment when I walked up on that deer and I was just like, wow, this is cool. And that's the stuff that inspires songs like Powder in the Pan. And I think a lot of folks will appreciate that song. And you don't have to be in the black powder to appreciate it. It's a song about hunting,
Yeah.
but it's definitely, set in a historic era for sure. But, and that was the other goal is, lines like Face to the Wind. I wanted people to know I'm a hunter, and not a non-hunter would not know some of that stuff to
Right.
put in there. And I wanted I wanted people to listen to it and go, oh, he gets it.
Yeah.
That was one of my goals.
Well, and there's also even too you were talking about in that song is, and I can't remember the exact lyric. You can remind me if you like, but if the idea of like, even if you don't get a deer, it's okay. You look where we are. Like there's, I think,
Yeah.
and especially too in our in our world of being hunters, and there's some people who are on the outside of it that might not understand. It's like the revelry and the beauty of being there. It doesn't the when you have the experience
Mm-hmm.
of having an animal on the ground, it's great because you can feed your family and your friends, right? And there's richness to that, but the really enriching part of that is just being out there and witnessing and staring at the squirrels
Yeah.
between the trees, as you talk about in that song, jumping around. Like there's this beauty and appreciation of nature, which also, culminates these hunters, like you said, man, this full circle moment to see this deer on the ground and all the history that came into that and
Yeah.
what that's going to inspire with the songs. There's so much richness to that I think that, that those who know, but if not, it's a great introduction to that idea too. What is it like to be out there and to be hunting? And what is that, you're showing the appreciations of much more than just pulling a trigger there.
Yeah. And there's a famous Fred Bear quote about that. I don't, I'd have to paraphrase it, but it's like, if having a successful hunt is taking an animal, then you're missing the point. I forget his exact wording, and that's kind of the same philosophy I've always had. Even before I ever heard that quote, it was just, I just wanted to get out there and, watch the sun come up in the trees and, experience that. You could feel the thermal shift and you're like, oh, here comes the heat, like I just love being in the woods. I love, I love harvesting an animal and having deer jerky in the fridge too. But even if I don't, I'm still happy, you know.
Yeah, no, that appreciation. I mean, it comes through in your music, man. You paint these mosaics of this time period, but also something that it transfers through to time to like our present day. I'm listening to this and I'm imagining my experiences, my day to day, especially something with powder in the pan too, right? And then that also makes me think about the time period of what it was and what it is now, and the evolution of firearms, or just the evolution of the
Mhm.
American West becoming what it is now, and our way of life, and being able to go back to that time period, which was much simpler, and it was much more wild, and there was I
Yeah.
really get into that when I'm listening to your music. It really feels like a soundtrack to that memory lane of those times and of the rich history. So I love that it pulls from things. It pushes me to want to learn more about different people that you're talking about, or different timelines, or you may be wondering what's so great about that Arkansas mule, right? So it's something that
Yeah. Yeah.
always it gets there's so much richness. I really love it. I think everyone else is really going to love these volumes. Obviously number one's out, number two's in October, but you have something that you're kind of offering for those who want to directly purchase a physical product in this day of streaming age. You're still producing awesome CDs and vinyls. And if people are buying that now, they're going to get volume two now. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So you get a jump on everybody else. If buy a CD, you get the second volume now. Why wait, you know?
Don't wait.
Um,
Go now too. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the reason why it's happening later digitally is, the almighty algorithm that, all this content is built on. So it's spread out a little more, and volume two comes out in October, which is just in time for all those tree stand sits and all that. But if you don't want to wait and you need something to stick in your truck, there's an album waiting for you. Or if you just you like the music and you want to support it and you just want to throw it in a closet, I don't care. It's cool because it's not just a sleeve. Like my earlier albums were just a simple
Yep.
sleeve, with artwork on the front. This is actually like a trifold double album, so it's a little more substantial of a package. You can also download it. A lot of folks still love downloading on iTunes and Amazon and stuff. And then stream. I mean, stream away. I
Yeah.
love the support.
Well, and where is obviously there's a lot of streaming platforms and stuff, and you guys can just search Hawken Horse. But as far as learning a little bit
Yeah,
more about this and maybe diving into some of your other music and some stories, you've had a lot of interviews, you've been in a
yeah,
lot of podcasts. There's a rich history on your website. Why don't you tell people where they can go in and learn more, and as far as your website, and then also where can people follow you and kind of learn more about your journey and some of the updates, or when singles are coming out and things of that nature.
yeah. Hawkenhorse.com is where you're going to find most info. Um, I've got my store on there with T-shirts and coffee mugs and all that stuff. But I also have a blog that I keep up on there, and it's not all even about music. Sometimes I'll write about a history thing I think is interesting. Sometimes I'm telling you about a new song coming out or whatever, but I do keep a blog up on there. Um, Also, my Instagram followings is a robust place. You can hang out. I have tons of content going on there all the time. Facebook is very active. YouTube actually is very strong and growing as well. So I'm pretty committed to being active on there as well. You can't be active everywhere. It's just like
Right.
there's only one Hawken Horse, so and only so much day. So yeah, so definitely, follow me YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, etc. But yeah, the album will be on Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube Music, all the places. Um, I just got done doing all the promo audio stuff for Amazon because they have little intros like to the album and little tidbits, which is kind of a cool feature of Amazon Music. You can find out more information like about the song you're listening to or whatever. But yeah, any of those places. And, you know, I do have a newsletter where I keep people up to date on that as well. So hawkenhorse.com is the place.
Yeah, no, I've signed up for that. Great information coming out, all the updates. I was kind of curious too, as far as, I talked to a lot of my guests about the idea of legacy, and I wanted to know, obviously, you've written with and for and with other folks, but with Hawken Horse specifically, I was curious, what is it that you're hoping that you're able to, uh, you know, basically share with your, audience over the time? What is it, this legacy you hope that this musical project leaves for them? And
Yeah.
and also, what are you hoping to maybe inspire as far as where they go and what they learn and whatever it may be there too? And then also just kind of on a personal setting too, how do you feel about your legacy and the things that you've produced over the years? And, how do you hope that those things are remembered? And or is this something you think about on a day to day or even a week to week or whatever, as far as what it is that you're outputting that you're leaving behind? Because you have things that are going to be in a
Yeah.
digital space that will always be able to have people come back to it. It's something that you've written that people can come back to and check out at any point in time. So yeah, I'm always kind of curious about that with my
Yeah.
guests and specifically people who are artists like yourself.
Yeah. Legacy wise, I think Hawken Horse is part of. I think that was probably an inner yearning to work on the legacy a little bit. Like I think part of it was, I'm proud of some of these love songs I've written and these silly songs over the years, but they're fun. But legacy wise, I bet you that was an underlying, you know, reason that Hawken Horse even came about. I think it was like I want to leave behind something a little more profound, artistically profound. I work with a lot of, I'm friends with David Wright, who's a famous painter, and he does a lot of frontier mountain man paintings. And I've always looked at him as somebody who's got an iconic legacy for his work. And I actually had coffee with him one time and I told him, I was like, what a privilege to like get to be a creative and get to make a living being a creative, like just using your God-given creative abilities and eking out a career in it. And he's kind of been a mentor in that world a little bit, and he's not like a musician, but as he always tells me, he's like, I'm only a flat artist. But um so my music, I want to leave something there so people can go back and revisit these stories and they can access this. Even after I'm gone, they can say, who was Jedediah Smith, and go find a song about him and get a history lesson in 3 minutes, instead of having to read an entire book or whatever. A, a song is a very easy way to get a history lesson. And personally, I just want to be known as a good husband and dad and friend ultimately, and somebody who, was reliable. And, it's funny. It's when you're thinking more on that level, it's just like, it's amazing what isn't important suddenly when you think about your legacy. And it's not about, all the things hanging on the wall. It's about, the people in your lives. So, you know, that's, so I guess, yeah, that's my real ultimate legacy. And the relationships that Hawken Horse has already given me has just been blowing my mind. I've made so many, friends. I don't call people fans. I mean, they're just friends. It's just another dude who's like me who loves the same stuff. And that's what is so refreshing about this. So I don't have any ego.
Well, it's great, man. I mean, it's very true. Yeah, when people appreciate your listen, I mean, it's nothing you haven't heard before, but you're an exceptional musician. You write wonderful songs. They're rich. There's so many brilliant sounds and things that are put into it. The writing that you have, as far as your lyrics, are very, well thought out, man. They're just great, fun stories. I love every song has something a little bit different to it, and I've just fallen in love with your music. I mean, it's been a couple of years now when I was first introduced to it. And I was like, wow, man, this is really great. And I always wanted to chat with you. And I'm glad we get this chance. Really appreciate you joining me. Thank you for sharing your talents with the
Oh
world,
man.
man. Music is incredible, and I can't wait to see. And hopefully, I feel like there's you and Clay need to perform somewhere together. And right, I feel like there's a live version of
Hey,
Arkansas Mule. Clay, if you're listening, call up
hey,
Andrew, get him over on the podcast.
Clay and Hawken Horse coming to Branson.
There you go. There you go. I'll be there with the cameraman to document this for everyone. But I appreciate you coming on once again. Thank you so much, and best of luck with
Yeah.
everything. And once again, everybody head on over to hawkenhorse.com. Go ahead and make your purchases and check out some of the other awesome albums you put together. You've got a wealth of wonderful sounds there for people to check out.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, and I'm also glad you made it out okay with the hurricane. I was a little concerned. It looks pretty bad down there. So
Thank you. Listen, your albums were a very nice break as we were like driving through the other day, getting place. My wife and I were listening to it. She's like, I really like this song. Yeah, me too. It was a good little distraction of my crazy whirlwind around me. So it
glad
was
to
good.
help. Glad to help.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you, Andrew, once again, man. You have an awesome day.
You too, George. See ya.
Take care.